Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Who's your favorite leader and why?
That's an interesting question, just because I'm drawn to somebody who I wouldn't even want to work for. There's a difference between who I'd want to read about and who I'd want to work for, I think. Because I love to read about Steve Jobs. I just find him endlessly fascinating. And actually, I did talk to Daniel Goldman about him on the show because I wanted to know what his opinion was of his emotional intelligence. And he was saying he thought he was great at achievement motivation and goal setting, which are parts of it. But he was horrible at empathy, which is another part of it. So we can be good at some parts of emotional intelligence and not so great at others. For me, to want to work for somebody, respect is important. And I don't see he would be very good at giving me much respect as an employee. I don't know, just from what I've read. I've never met the guy. And now of course, you can't. But if people I've met who I would like to work for, Keith Brock, I mentioned, incredible from DocuSign. Doug Conant, I've interviewed him several times. He turned Campbell Soup around from their engagement, was in the tank, and he totally brought it around. He wrote 30,000 plus handwritten notes to everybody to really tie into that empathy area. So there's so many people who've been on my show, and I'm thinking it's really hard to just pick one. But I do love to read about Steve Jobs. He fascinates me.
So if you sat on a park bench with Steve Jobs, if you ever had that opportunity, if there was one question you wanted to ask him, what do you reckon you might ask him?
So there's two different Steve Jobs. There's the Steve Jobs before he was fired, and there's the Jobs who came back. I think it'd be easier to ask the second Steve Jobs question. I would like to know that from the second Steve Jobs, what humbled him or what changed him and what he learned from that experience and what he would have done differently.
Yeah, that's a huge question. That's awesome. I'd love to know that too. Yeah, very good. Now, the show here, Diane, is called Leadership is Changing. Now, when I mentioned that title of the show or that saying, what does that mean to you?
Leadership is changing. It means it's funny. One of my first speaking engagements was for Forbes, and they had me speak about the future of the workplace and what to expect. And it was based on generational differences. So I guess for early on, I was always looking at the changing workplace and what was going to be happening, not just for leaders, but in general. We've seen more generations than ever before all working together. So that was a big change. So change is just the only constant, right? We know that. I teach a lot of courses on leadership change. I've taught thousands of online courses now. I stopped counting after 1,000.
Wow.
It's really high. And a lot of them are based on leadership change. And the thing is, we think that we're all up for this challenge. I had a lot of crisis readiness experts on my show and all this before COVID. And now we found out that maybe we weren't so prepared, right? So we think that we're ready for change until the real change happens. And so I think having foresight is the hugest thing. Anybody who's read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits knows the first habit is be proactive, and being proactive is really having foresight and thinking and beginning with the end in mind and all the things that he wrote about in his day. It was a classic. And we need to get out of status quo thinking. For me, that's what I talk a lot about with curiosity. It's not really about asking a million questions or reading a million books. It's really a combination of things. And one of the biggest combination that it's in that combination, I should say, is status quo behaviors need to be looked at, because just because we've done it right in the past and it worked great then, it doesn't mean it's going to work well in the future. Ask Kodak or Blockbuster or any of the companies who kept doing things that worked great in the past. So we've seen the research. We've seen the woman that goes into the doctor's office and they ring the bell, and the people around her are actors, and they just stand up and sit down every time the bell rings, that she eventually stands up and sits down when the bell rings without knowing why. We're all standing up and sitting down And we don't know why for a lot of the things that we're doing. And I think we need to take a look at what things are we doing just because it worked in the past that maybe won't be working again in the future, and be like Ben and Jerry's, who, when their ice cream is no longer successful, they give it a burial on their website. They have little headstones on one of their web pages that shows this flavor was great from this year to that year, but we've celebrated it. We think it was great for its time, but we move on.
Yep. That's cool. And I love what you say about the status quo and getting out of that, because I think a lot of people today is that they, A, don't think, and B, they don't take time to think, and C, they will just follow others. And I'm like, and the person you're talking about standing up, sitting down and so forth, you're so right. And I think a lot of leaders need to actually do the thinking and actually get out of that status quo. Absolutely. And it's interesting how you said that we thought we were ready from a crisis side of things, but then when it actually happened, we weren't. And that's not the last one. I think there'll be other things coming too in the future. And so are we ready for that as well? You're so right. What you're saying too is that change is constant. It's probably the only thing that's constant at the moment is change. And yeah, we need to really face that as really important for us to think about that. Who's your favorite leader and why?
One of my favorite leaders, and I really did not know about this person for a long time, but when I think about different people who have had impact on a very large scale, my choice will be surprising, but he would be Deng Xiaoping of China. The ability for one single individual to change the course of country and figure out a way to leave a legacy wherein even after he is gone, the country continues to prosper and do well. That's phenomenal. And if I really look at the arc of history and how he shifted an entire country, the aspirations, how he reframed what China should be doing from what it was doing, is truly precious. So there would be a lot of people who would not know. I personally did not know, but moved to China for the last 30 years. Since 91, I've been going there and I've seen the development of China, and it's truly phenomenal. I have not seen any other country move up so sharply, so quickly at that stage.
Oh, that's cool. Here's a question I've just thought of, just going to pull out of the hat here, and that is, if you two were sitting down together on a park bench, so the leader you just spoke about, and you're having a coffee together, what question would you ask him?
My question would be, how did he keep himself together throughout that process? Because it was not easy, the transformation which he brought about. The more I learn about history, the more I read about history, the more I understand the challenges. To have energy, grit, perseverance to see through it, and yet be radically cruel the way an outside world would see it when needed, because it was an important decision for China, was phenomenal. And he did not stay a prisoner of his image. He was willing to break his own mold if it was called for. And that's something which I've not seen with many leaders. I think when leaders become larger than life, they tend to get framed and then they hesitate to break the shell.
And that's sad when it happens too, because I think you say bringing energy, grit and perseverance is really important, while at the same time being cool to the outside world. It's almost like the swan or the duck on the lake gliding along looking beautifully. But you and I know that underneath, those feet are going 10, or those webbed feet are going 10 to the dozen. And I think if you said what you just said, there was like, wow, that's huge. He wasn't a prisoner of his own image, and he broke that mold as well. I think that is very powerful. Too many leaders get stuck behind a title, have this image out there, they think they need to be something that they're not. And all you and I want is just them to be them.
Yeah.
Bring them their best self along.
Yeah. And societies and your audiences will tend to frame you over a period of time. And it is hard not to fall in love with your own image. But if the context calls for doing something which is different from what people have framed you, you should have the courage to do it and not be a prisoner of what will the world say. And when I look at how he has done a few things, he was very much willing to throw his image and take some really cold, hard calls when they were needed.
Because I was just going to ask you, Swami, for our listeners here, if they're thinking about themselves or they see a leader that's stuck in that image, what can they do for that courage? What could they do? So any ideas on what they could do to break the mold?
That is something which I would have asked then if I was having a coffee with him. But Tiananmen Square is what everyone remembers. he could have taken a popular call and allowed things to go, but he actually chose to repress the uprising the way an Anglo-Saxon media would portray it. But there was a cold-hearted reason why he did that. And when you look at the people who were with him, who were equally shocked at his call, that is something which I would love to understand from him. How did he bring himself about to do things which no one expected him to do?
Yeah, that'll be amazing to hear or learn in relation to that. Now, the show here, Swami, is called Leadership is Changing. When I talk about that title, or I mention it, or I mention that saying, what does that mean to you?
Dennis, when I think about leadership and when I think about whom I used to get fascinated by or charmed by when I started my career, these were people who were really wise, knowledgeable, had a good worldview. They really had access to information that probably many did not have, including me. And today, when I think about leadership, access to information is universal. Whoever wants to make an effort can access information. And leadership today probably means different things to me. It's about not being a know-all, but being willing to be a learn-all, someone willing to understand different sets of circumstances, context, and occasionally willing to roll up the sleeves, get into trenches, and figure out things jointly so that we are clear about the purpose, but we are willing to take different actions to achieve those end goals. So I would say the distance would be more from a know-all to someone who is willing to learn, someone who is willing to be flexible, still being fixated on the same purpose and goal, not losing that, willing to mend and bend to make things happen.
So you're saying, I think what you see there, just in a summary, is not to be a know-all, but to be a learn-all and learn as much as you can, be flexible. Great way of putting it. Who's your favorite leader? Now, this person could be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
I think that when I asked this question in advance, which I appreciate, I like this. I like that. Just Nelson Mandela. I went back and forth. There's several great leaders. I think for me, not just because he was in prison for so long, but just I feel like he could always hold like these two truths at one time. Somehow, okay, so systemic injustice and apartheid with reconciliation. So he'd fight the systemic injustice of apartheid at the same time preach this message of unity and reconciliation. When one feels like you're fighting a system and the other one seems like you're fighting for cohesiveness, and he could do that. And he was a leader as a philanthropist, but he was also a leader on the political side of things. And those sometimes seem like different things. So I don't know, just super impressed with, I love how he just carried himself as a human being as well. I just love the cut of his jib, which is an American sailing term. I love how he presented himself, but just the weight of the things that he was involved with. It feels like you would crack under the burden of that, yet he didn't. He stood up in that thing and remained true, as far as I know, to those beliefs. And it's just so inspirational.
Yep, totally. I think he's a great guy, great inspiration, and that inspiration continues, even though that he's now passed. Yeah. Steve, if you had the chance to sit on a park bench with Nelson Mandela, have a coffee together, what would be one question you might ask him?
Oh, man. The first thing that pops in my mind is, how do you do it? How do you carry the weight of what you know and what you've seen and what you believe when it feels like you're fighting the long defeat, which is a phrase that I don't remember who initially said, I think Howard Thurman. But how do you withstand that? Because I know when I've been to Rwanda 4 times and I've been broken every time. Like I feel like I'm just broken. And it gives me excitement to carry on the vision, to get people excited to rally the troops, to raise money, to raise awareness, but it just breaks me. And I'd like to know, and maybe he was broken, I don't know, but how do you go to prison for all those years and then come out and still cling to your message? How do you carry that much weight of the world and still get up in the morning?
A nice question. Well done. So the show here is called Leadership is Changing. When I say that title or that statement, what does that mean to you?
I think it means exactly what it is. I love the title. It is changing. And I think the people that think leadership is a single skill set that you learned 30 years ago and you cling to that are getting left behind as leaders. And so it's changing because of so many reasons. It's changing because the world has changed. The technology is changing. The perspectives of the generations are changing. We're much more global in nature. So all of these things require new levels of leadership and not even new levels, just a different approach to leadership. We need to start thinking about leadership differently, or we're going to be left in the dust. We're not going to have anybody to lead. We're not going to have anything to lead if we keep trying to lead the way that we did 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah, I can just imagine the leader looking around going, hello, anyone there? Yeah.
Hey, where is everybody? I'm a leader.
Yeah.
A leader requires followers.
Yeah, absolutely they do. Yeah, I think John Maxwell is an author, speaker, and a guy I've followed for 30 years. And he says, if you're out there and you turn around as a leader and no one's following you, all you're doing is taking a hike. That's all you're doing.
Yeah.
And
I love that. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's really important what you've just said there about making sure that you're staying and moving forward as a leader for sure. And how would leaders do that? How would they make sure that they're staying ahead of things? What do you reckon is one or two things they might need to do?
I think they need to be current with the trends that are happening. I think always be a learner. I think you just have to be a learner. And what I mean with that is not always skill set, is being aware of what are those trends. It's plugging into people that are futurists or looking at the future of work, or people in the industry that are changing things, where are the leaders emerging? I think that's one thing. Just paying attention. This person, all of a sudden, boom, they just came on the scene and they're this really effective leader and everybody's following them. What are they doing? How are they thinking? How are they communicating? Who are they resonating with? So I think just being aware of what's going on, and then just being willing to engage with your followers to find out what they need, what they want, and not assume I asked them 10 years ago what they wanted and they'll let me know if anything changes, right? Like, I told my wife I loved her 20 years ago, and I'll let her know if it changes. So you need to be engaged. It has to be an interactive experience with your followers. I think the idea of just saying, I'm the leader, I don't need to engage with my followers. Oh, they're just my people. I think those days are gone in large. They used to work, right? Because there used to be a society where people were desperate to have jobs and they just wanted to be told what to do. So that worked for them. And the leader just wanted the power, and I wanted to tell people what to do. And so it worked. Those days are gone. Now I think staying engaged with your followers, with your clients, with your stakeholders, and just even asking those questions, having opportunities for them to say, here's what's on my mind. Here's what's important to me. I think just communication is huge.
In the introduction, I talked about you helping leaders become happier. Do you think leaders today are happy?
It's tough. It's split. It's split. Most of the leaders that I've talked to are not happy. This has been part of my research. They're not always unhappy, but very few are actually happy. There's a difference, right? There's a spectrum between, there's the unhappy sort of people, and those are people that are pretty obvious. Then there's the happy people that are on the other side, and there's a few of them. But then the rest of us are just in the middle, biding our time. And we think, I'm going to be happy when? I'm going to be happy when I retire. I'm going to be happy when the kids are out of the house. I'm going to be happy when I get this promotion. We're always looking for when. And we always say we have this hope, right? I have this hope that I'm going to be happier. And what I tell people all the time is that hope is powerful, right? Hope is a great thing to have. There's people in Ukraine are hoping for this, and I'm hoping for this, but hope is not a strategy. If you're sitting there going, man, I hope I get happier, I hope you do too. But that's not going to get you any closer to happiness than actually taking action. And so I think my experiences as leaders, a lot of them are not happy, and they range from being middle of the road to very unhappy.
Yeah. And I think the two words hope and try should not be the vocab of a leader, because we're not trying, we're not hoping. We may be giving others hope by our leadership and by us leading. I think it's really important. Steve, I think there's the word happy as you're talking about, but what about the word satisfied? So I might be happy, but I may not be satisfied in what I'm doing. How does that play out?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And I think of happiness in terms of how much is our world, how much of our leadership, how much of our business is aligned with who we really are. That's the core of our happiness there. But I think, being happy and not satisfied is okay as a leader. I think that's fine. If you're running a business, you can be really happy, but you might not be satisfied with the results. And I think that's okay as long as the motivation for increasing your results is aligned with who you are. If, let's say, I just want to have a good living, be well respected in my community, make a difference. And I'm doing all of those things. But if I'm not satisfied because of some personal motivation, that's fine. But if it's some outside influence that is now making me unsatisfied, like if somebody says, you know what you should do? You should expand your business. You should do more. You should make more money. And if I fall into the trap of listening to that, and now my discontentment is because somebody thinks I should have more, or my neighbor has more, or some definition of good leaders has more, and now I'm discontent, I think that's not an internal discontentment. That's something that's externally motivated. And I think we need to question that a little bit, because what happens is we start chasing that, and then we become unhappy. So I think it's okay to be happy and not settled, wanting more, but I think really challenge what is the motivation of that? Is that really an internal thing or is it driven by something external? And if it's external, I think there's a risk of that potentially manifesting itself in unhappiness in the future because you're chasing some vision that's not even your own.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.